Hi folks, Tom Johnson Medlin again on our servant leadership modules. This is our second module, and I wanted to spend some time talking about two of the 10 characteristics that Greenleaf put forth. The first two characteristics being listening and empathy. So first, let's pull out that list of the 10 characteristics that Greenleaf has postulated as vital to the life of a servant leader. And take a look on the left-hand side of the particular item. You should have listed how you would grade yourself between 1 and 5. And then on the right-hand side of that same characteristic, you should have graded in a different color how your organization, your ministry, your team, your group has fared in your estimation when you regard those individual items. So let's start at listening. I think one of the most important pieces of listening is not only providing space, that is auditory space for people to be able to express what it is they have to say, but it's also reflecting back again after you have heard what has been said, so that you're completing a listening cycle, a listening loop. Anybody who has taken any communication management classes knows that there is an actual equation for figuring out the difficulty behind a communication. Take, for example, an organization with only 5 people. There are 5 people. One person is going to communicate to the other 4, and each one of those 4 people will have a chance to hear what it is that's being communicated, or read, in the case of a memo, to internalize it and digest it, and then to bring some sort of understanding to the material that's there. Generally, in listening or in communicating, you have to have some kind of a return loop so that you know that the person has understood what it is that, you're trying to express, either in your memo or in your discussion or in your conversation. So part of listening, then, if you are the person who is doing the listening, is returning the communication back again to the person who is expressing it. This not only helps clarify in terms of a real pragmatic and linear standard, but it also gives the person a chance to clarify deeper if something is not understood properly. But the other side to listening is not just for clarification and communication back again, but it's important for the person to have been heard. As we know, as individuals, as social creatures, as animals who love really to be in groups, and to work with other people and to live in communities, whether they're families or whether they're organizations or group settings and teams. We admire that, and there's something very positive and healthy about that relationship for us, but we know that within that we can't just exist in a group without being heard. So the vital task of listening is first to reiterate back to the person so that they know that they have been heard, and two, to reiterate back to them in such a fashion that they can hear that you understood what they're saying. In many cases, as a supervisor, you'll begin to find out that sometimes people are not actually hearing what it is that they're saying. They may be bringing either an issue or a problem, or their attempt at a solution to an issue or a problem in the workplace or in a relationship, and as they're talking, they may be speaking very dejected about this. They may be speaking very unattached to it. And so what they're really communicating is not only their solution or their take on the issue, but they're also communicating to you the fact that they're not really very connected to that. And so as a really exemplar leader, as a leader with passion and a leader with a great skill, it's very important for you to return those pieces of information to the person who is giving the communication as well. To say, I hear what you're saying. I hear you're saying that we should try doing X, Y, and Z. And I just want you to know that I understand that. I also want you to know that while you're talking about this, you're either very irate, or you're very enraged, or you're very lackadaisical, or you're very disconnected from the process and apathetic. So some of that has to also be returned to people. Why? Because part of the listening process is listening for attitude and listening for a person's stance and their posturing and where they're at. So a good leader not only listens, not only provides space for listening to occur, but also reflects back again what has been communicated. And you'll find it in that example of 5 people trying to communicate, that if you were to give those other 4 people bits of information, that in many cases, 4 of them will reiterate back to you something completely different than you had intended. So you'll begin to recognize the importance as a leader, as a supervisor, as someone who is being looked to in a group. You'll realize the reason why we start to also add how people posture themselves back into the communication, because that carries a lot. In the example of the memo of the 4 people that you have sent it to, or the conversation that you've had, a lot of times people, as they're reading it, if they take offense or they take a particular liking to something that is being identified either in a memo or in a conversation, they may mishear it to their advantage or to their disadvantage, depending on what the issue is. So please keep in mind that reflecting these things back again is very, very important. You as a communicator, when you communicate, make sure you ask for feedback back again, and you then as a listener, the other side of communication, feedback what you're hearing, both in attitude and also in content. Along with that, there needs to be, like I said, a space. So it is really important to be able to come to terms with gaps in conversation. Just like that pause that I gave now, or the pause there. Be comfortable with inserting pauses, not necessarily only to slow down a conversation, not necessarily only to fill the air with some space in which people can think, but recognize that silence can sometimes stimulate in people emotion and cognitive dissonance or cognitive assonance or connectivity with an idea. So that space and that silence can actually work towards the entire process of leading other people. It can give them the realm, or almost like the territory from within which they can then have a conversation with you. You can't see space, that is invisible. You can't see silence, but it's a very important part of listening and communication. The second thing that I'd like to take a look at is empathy. Now, empathy is the sense where you are suffering with. To be empathetic is to come alongside somebody's suffering, however they're relating that. And actually, empathy can also not only be in the case of coming alongside suffering, but it can come alongside of somebody's victory. So to be empathetic with people is to exude, not only with your mouth, but in your mannerisms, a sense that you understand what's going on. For the positive things that are going on in your group or your organization's life, helping people to understand that you recognize the positive things that are happening in their life, in their work, in their process within the structure of the group or the organization. So giving out accolades and praises and acknowledgments and thanks is very, very much a part of empathy. The other piece of empathy is when people come to you, is starting on that ground where you're listening, and then at some point in that re-acknowledgement of what you've heard, letting them know that you understand. I hear what you're saying. I also understand how painful this is. I understand how difficult this is for you to come to me with this conflict you're having with your coworker, or I understand that you're really stepping out here and you are becoming vulnerable by talking to me about this. So empathy is an acknowledgement that you understand what's going on. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily agree, and it's not always necessary for you to say, I understand but I don't agree. But there may be times when you need to. But just keep in mind that empathy is reflecting back again, this time, not only that you understand, but that you're alongside that person in the conversation. That you're not participating as someone who is going to judge them for that communication. Now, there may be times when you have to make decisions based on information that you find out. That does not mean that you do not have to be empathetic. So keep in mind these first 2 principles of servant leadership from Greenleaf's cycle of understanding of leadership, and that is listening, providing a space, providing some reflection back about content and about attitude of what's going on, and then also empathy. A part of that reflecting back again is the fact that you understand, and not just that you understand, again, the content like we talked about in listening, but also understanding that you are aware of what that person has risked, what that person has achieved, what that person is going through, or what that person may be feeling. as a result of having made this communication. So take a look at how you graded yourself at the outset of this, and now having heard some small words, some small excerpts on these pieces of the puzzle of servant leadership, grade yourself again. Maybe you'll see that you really are a good listener because you fulfill those things, or maybe you'll see, well, I wasn't as good of a listener as I thought. And the same with empathy. And again, take a look at your group or your organization or your team and evaluate how they participate in these ideas that go behind listening and empathy. Is your group good at listening? Is your group good at empathy? Is your supervisor good at these things? Are you as a supervisor good at those things? Is your leadership team good at these things? Okay? Again, use a 1 to 5. So thanks for your time, and we'll take up 2 more of the characteristics of a servant leader from Robert Greenleaf's model in the next session.